Hi, this is Schmitty from the Concentrate Fire Armada blog, in the first of what I hope will be a series of videos about tactics on the table in Armada. Now, I wish I had a catchy name for the video series, but I don't yet, so if you think of one, please let me know and I'll add it in for the next one. Anyway, what I found was in typing on my blog and reading sometimes on the Armada forums, a lot of the focus and discussion tends to be on upgrades and admirals and fleet lists and things of that nature, and I think that's just because it's really easy to talk about. Tactics and maneuvers are a little bit more abstract and harder to discuss. At one point I thought maybe I'd try to do animations, but frankly that was just going to be too much work. So I'm trying out a video series. What I hope to do is go through basic formations, some basic fleet maneuvers you can use to set yourself up to win. I'm hoping that this will work regardless of which faction or admirals or ships you like to play. You should get something out of this. So for our first video we're going to be looking at the concept of capping the T. Now this comes from really World War I era naval warfare, where battleships and cruisers would form up in a line and go at each other, and capping the T was sort of the pinnacle holy grail maneuver that one side would hope to pull off on the other. I see it play out frequently, if not traditionally, on tables in games of Armada, and I thought I'd want to share some of those ideas with you. So let's take a look. Okay, so here we have a classic example of capping the T in naval terms. You've got an Imperial gun line moving forward, and the Rebel gun line has cut across the front of that line. And it's done this so that these two ships can bring their full broadsides onto the lead ship of the Imperial gun line. The Imperial gun line is able to fire back, but isn't necessarily able to bring its full firepower. The ship caught behind in the line, again, has no shot, assuming these are broadside, like old World War I ships. And so this was sort of the ideal because this lead ship could just get slagged by the rebel ships. Return fire was limited, and the ability of the rest of the Imperial fleet to engage is really limited. Now, you don't often see victories forming up in a conga line where this could actually happen on a tabletop in Armada. But this game state is still something I think you really are looking to achieve. And let me show you what I mean. So if we're talking in terms of Armada, you've got two rebel ships here with nice medium range shots against one in return. Now, if this Vic happens to have gunnery teams, it can shoot back at both rebel ships, but that fire's getting spread, whereas the rebel ships are able to concentrate their fire on that Imperial ship. Now, this ship in back, it actually might have a shot at extremely long range, but it's going to get obstructed. It's only going to get its red dice. And basically you've put it in a bad position. So this is a really cool setup from a firepower standpoint. You've got your whole fleet concentrating on a part of the Imperial fleet with limited ability to return fire. Also, you can look at movement options. This ship's going to have to move before this one. You've able to kind of constrict some things. So to me, the ideal of capping the T in Armada terms is really about how you can put your whole fleet against a part of their fleet, and also to get their fleet in their own way. So really to get this ship here, it has to move through that one, which is really hard to do in Armada. So it's almost like you're using the opposing fleet as an obstacle to its own progress. So let me set up an example of how this might actually appear in a game of Armada. Okay, so here's my example of how you can cap the T in Armada. What I've got in front of you here is probably the most common formation you see in any game of Armada, and that's just the line abreast. And it really doesn't matter what ships are out there. It could be an ISD and two Vics, it could be a Liberty and some Nebs, just kind of whatever. Most often when I see people playing Armada, ships end up sort of in this horizontal line across each other, like this. And the reason for that, I think, has a lot to do with deployment. You can deploy out to your range 3, and most players choose to deploy the full range out, so all their ships end up at the same kind of in that equal line. You put the squadrons out in front, and then you start to move forward to your enemy and see what happens. And there are some real advantages to this formation. The ideal of you can have all of your ships hitting your opponent at the same time. It's fairly easy to coordinate, but there are some real weaknesses too. Let's say this player was coming up against a couple of assault frigates, okay? And, if I'm that rebel player, the first thing you're really going to do is, if you see someone flying line abreast, obviously you don't fly straight at them. Even if I'm playing Imperials, I'm not going to fly straight at them. Because if I can start heading to one side of their line or the other, okay, and this doesn't have to be broadside ships, but if I start heading towards one side of their line or the other, I've suddenly put a ton of pressure on them. And if I can make it all the way out here to get to that one side, now I've capped the T. Now, they're not heading this way. It's not really a T-type setup, but now this Imperial player has to respond. I've got my two ships concentrating their fire on part of their fleet. His ability to return fire is limited both by range and by obstruction of their own ships. The squadrons can move over here easily enough, but once they do, these ships over here start to have trouble issuing orders to them. Okay? Now, when it comes to turning a line abreast, the Imperial player is in a lot of trouble. You know, this ship can turn no problem. Get the squadrons out of the way. It's going to come out here, but now this ship has to come out that far, and then this ship has to come out here, and then this one out here. So by hitting one side or the other of that line abreast, it really makes it hard on those outside ships to turn sharp enough to actually get themselves back in the fight. So anytime you see an opponent line up in a nice straight line across, drive hard for one side of that line or another, because you're going to basically take these own ships out of the game because his inside ships will get in the way. Now, if I'm the Imperial player and I want to avoid this, here's what you can do. Okay, set up mostly the same formation. Okay, but I'm going to drop back these raiders. And this comes from one of the real secrets, in my opinion, of the Armada. Use your whole deployment zone. Yes, it goes out to range 3. You can still deploy things all the way to the back edge. You start with those raiders deployed back there. Okay, so now I see these assault frigates going for my flank. This one can turn fine, but this Vic can also turn, and it doesn't have to worry about that raider being in the way. This guy is then easier to turn, and he, if you've got nav set up, can actually probably turn and come behind the line if you have him set far enough back. So that, what I would call more of a, it's kind of a box formation, but splayed out like kind of a wedge formation. It's much more reactive to things going back. So by taking the outsides of your line and dropping them back a little bit, you can react more to someone going for the end of your line. Now, you do lose out on maybe concentrating all your firepower together in one turn, but if your opponent's going to be nice enough to go straight at your line, you can easily speed up those outside ships and get there as well. Alright, well I hope you guys found that interesting and maybe educational. Please let me know in the comments if there's ways that I can improve these videos, topics you'd like to see discussed or whatever, but thanks for watching and reading as always, and good luck on your next game.